What is happening, baby? This is Dallas Clark, and welcome back to the Huddle Chat Sports Network's very own Fantasy Football Huddle, presented by Danklyfe brand and Big Ola's Heavy Equipment Repair on the Big Island in Hawaii. Shouts out to Big Ola, and shouts out to you for tuning in to yet another episode of the Huddle Chat Sports Network. Today, we're talking about the Week 2 startums and situms after all the action in Week 1. You're probably wondering how to adjust to your team and to your roster after Week 1. We saw tons of elite talents like Jalen Hurts and Sam Laporta and Mark Andrews struggle this week. We saw some rookie debuts that came out to be absolute duds in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Caleb Williams. And we saw some key injuries to critical players in Puka Nacua and Jordan Love. So there's a lot of adjustments to be made. And the goal of this episode and the goal of your lineup this week is to not overreact about what has transpired in these past few weeks, especially with your top 20 or 30 picks. We're only going to be talking about those players that you're really debating taking off the bench and putting into your starting lineup in this week, and those players can really make or break your weeks. So we're going to have to dive in deep. I got a couple players from each position to start and a couple players from each position to sit, and we're going to be talking about a bunch of big news today. So make sure you smash that like button because you have no idea how much it helps me out. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscriptions bar as well as that notifications bell. And don't forget to check us out over on Spotify, where we have more convenient versions of the episodes, where you have audio only versions that you can listen to while you drive, clean the house, feed the babies, whatever you got to do. Huddle Chat Sports Network has your back. Without further ado, let's get things cracked off right. Let's fill up our cup, roll something up, and get right into the first startums and situms of the year. We're going to be talking about Baker Mayfield playing against the Detroit Lions as a start this week, coming fresh off of 4 touchdowns and 29 fantasy football points last week. I'm never going to advise chasing points, but you're going to be looking at him having an absolutely beautiful matchup against the Detroit Lions this week. They allowed 317 yards on Sunday Night Football, and the Lions could really jump out to a lead early on this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, which would cause Baker Mayfield to throw and cause more production for you. I'm also looking at starting Jaden Daniels versus the New York Giants. I mean, would you have believed me if I told you last week that 2 of the top 3 quarterbacks are Baker Mayfield and Jaden Daniels? The third quarterback that I haven't mentioned yet is Derek Carr. Top 3 quarterbacks in fantasy football right now for you, ladies and gentlemen. But going back to Jaden Daniels, he had 28.2 fantasy football points last week, and that came off of only 184 passing yards. Like I said, he was quarterback 3 in Week 1, and his elite rushing made up for his lack of throwing production. He led the NFL, all running backs, all quarterbacks, in goal line carries and goal line touchdowns last week as well. He's only going to get better as a passer, and this matchup against the New York Giants might provide the perfect opportunity for him to do just that. Make sure you smash that like button before we get into our stardom and situm wide receivers as well, and hit that subscriptions bar as well as that notifications bell. The wide receivers we're going to be starting today, I'm talking about Amari Cooper from the Cleveland Browns against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Let's be honest, he had an awful opening weekend. It was a large part due to bad quarterback play from Deshaun Watson and just an absolutely terrible matchup on defense as a whole against that really good Cowboys defense, and his one-on-one matchup against Trayvon Diggs, who was coming back and had a fantastic game in his return to the NFL. Now you're looking at Amari Cooper having a great matchup this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who just allowed 348 yards to wide receivers last week against the Dolphins, and they had 2 receivers going over 100 yards. Last time Amari Cooper played the Jacksonville Jaguars, he had 14 targets, 77 yards, so I'm definitely plugging Amari Cooper into this lineup with a much better matchup against the Jaguars. I'm also going to be plugging in Chris Godwin against the Detroit Lions, just like Baker Mayfield. He led all Tampa Bay wide receivers in targets last week with 8 targets. He also caught all 8 of those targets for 83 yards and a touchdown. You're looking at him facing that Detroit Lions defense that we talked about earlier, and they allow slot wide receivers to get some room. You're looking at Tyler Johnson having 5 catches for 79 yards last week, while Cooper Kupp went for 21 targets, and he also had that 110 yards on that 14 catches that he had. You're looking at Chris Godwin having a lot of opportunity this week, despite how good Mike Evans is playing, just due to the sheer volume that this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense seems to be playing at on offense. Going on to the running backs we're going to be talking about, I'm starting Tony Pollard from the Titans against the New York Jets. He played in 62% of snaps last week, and he had 16 carries to Tyjae Spears' 4 carries last week, which was a lot different than people were expecting. Thought Tyjae Spears would give a lot more of a 50-50 split than he did with last week. You're looking at Tony Pollard finishing with 18.4 points last week at running back 12. He had that 94 yards and a touchdown against a tough matchup. So you're looking at Tony Pollard, as long as he gets that volume, he's going to be in the conversation to be a starter no matter what the matchup is and no matter how bad this Tennessee Titans offense is going to obviously be this year. Another running back that we're starting is one of the most obvious choices this week, J.K. Dobbins. I talked about him in the waiver wire episode this week. He had 10 carries for 135 yards and a touchdown, and you might still see close to a 50-50 split, but J.K. Dobbins was far more efficient. Gus Edwards, the Gus bus, looked like it was stuck in the mud all week throughout this game that we were watching for the Los Angeles Chargers. You're also playing that Carolina Panthers defense, which is an absolutely juicy matchup. And you got to add in the fact that J.K. Dobbins ran 13 routes, which was the most among Chargers running backs, and had 3 targets on those routes as well. Before we move into our sit-ems, let me make sure to ask you guys, if you haven't yet, to smash that like button. And don't forget to check into our live NFL kickoff show on Sundays. That'll be at 9:30 Mountain Standard Time and 11:30 Eastern Time. Going into our sitting quarterbacks, we're talking about Caleb Williams from the Bears. I'm sitting him. He did not have nearly as good of a game as Jaden Daniels did in his rookie debut. He had less than 50% completion. He only threw for 93 yards in the entire game. You're looking at the Texans last week against the Indianapolis Colts, creating pressure nearly 40% of the time. And don't let Anthony Richardson's good game fool you. They only completed 9 passes of their 19 attempts, and it's really tough to trust Caleb Williams until you can really see him come out in a breakthrough game. I'm also staying away from Aaron Rodgers against the Tennessee Titans. He just did not look right this week for the New York Jets. They even pulled him by the end of the game because they were getting beat so bad. The mobility was not good in the pocket for Aaron Rodgers. He seemed to be very tentative at any sign of pressure and threw the ball away at the earliest sign of any pressure in his face. And the Titans, despite what you might think about them, were fairly successful at generating pass rush last week, actually better than the defensive from the San Francisco 49ers was against the Jets last week. So you're looking at the Tennessee Titans potentially being able to wreak some havoc in Aaron Rodgers' face, and I think he's going to look fairly similar. And similarly to Caleb Williams, I'm staying away from him until I can see that elite Aaron Rodgers production return. Wide receivers I'm staying away from. I'm staying away from Jaden Reed. You cannot trust Green Bay wide receivers with Will Levis or with Malik Willis at quarterback. He's never thrown for over 100 yards in a game. No pass catcher has ever gotten more than 50 yards in any of his starts. And I'm sitting all Green Bay Packers that aren't named Josh Jacobs. While we're talking about pass catchers, I want to make the point to talk about tight ends really fast, just because I have not really mentioned them, because if you look at the stardoms and sit-ems, and in most cases, people are really kind of confused about their top elite tight ends. And as I've mentioned before, all your tight ends outside of 3 of the 12 elite tight ends put up less than 5 points this week. So I'm not panicking at the tight end room. I will add Isaiah Likely into the starting list as well. I'm going to be staying away from Dalton Schultz as well as Cole Kmet, as you heard me talk about in my previous episode today when we talked about the lessons that we learned in week 1. I said Cole Kmet is starting to lose his job to Gerald Everett. I may not be picking up Gerald Everett, but I'm definitely staying away from Cole Kmet. Moving back into the wide receiver position, I'm sitting Calvin Ridley against the New York Jets. He had tons of volume in week 1, and it could have been a lot better with more accurate throws from the quarterback. You're looking at Will Levis struggling against that good Bears defense, and the Jets might be the best defense on the planet right now. Plus, you're looking at him being matched up against Sauce Gardner for most of the game. I'm staying away from Calvin Ridley if I can. I'm also staying away from Zamir White at the running back position against the Baltimore Ravens. He played less snaps than Alexander Mattison, had less carries than Alexander Mattison, had less targets than Alexander Mattison, and ran less routes than Alexander Mattison. I believe that Alexander Mattison will be involved more in the passing game, and I think that game script is really going to determine how much Zamir White sees in his usage. If they're in a lead, he's going to see more playing time. But if they are down, like they're most likely going to be against the Baltimore Ravens, you're going to see Alexander Mattison get a lot more involved like he was this week. Last player we're talking about today, I'm staying away from Javonte Williams from the Broncos against the Pittsburgh Steelers. They only had 8 carries last week and 2 targets out of the backfield. That was less than Jaleel McLaughlin all around. You're looking at Bo Nix and the Broncos having a lot to figure out, obviously, on offense. And I've got absolutely no confidence in the Broncos, Jaleel McLaughlin, or anybody in a Denver Broncos uniform against this Pittsburgh Steelers defense this week. That's going to do it today for the startums and situms of week 2. Make sure you stay tuned in for the continuation of the rookie playbook, as well as some other videos we got coming in. And as well as I told you guys, we got that Sunday live episode coming out, our first NFL kickoff show of the year. It's going to be starting at 9:30 Mountain Standard Time and 11:30 Eastern Time. That's going to do it today, ladies and gentlemen. Keep your chin up and your attitude down, and I'm going to see y'all next time. Peace out.